Oh. Hello. What's going on? What are we serving back there? Let's get people up here. Is it IPA? Okay. Ohad, man. Let's get people up here. Christy. Good afternoon. Good evening for some of you that are joining us remote. Got a lot of seating here. I see some open seating right here. Nobody wants to be up here? Okay, all right. Well, we'll get started. My name is Jimmy Mwangi. I'm responsible for business development here at the Hub. Welcome to our monthly speaker series. Thank you. Today we've got a great topic here on supply chain and logistics. So we've got a great panel, got some heavy hitters, so get ready. But before we get going, we're going to do some trivia. So hopefully drop some knowledge, have some fun while doing this, right? If you haven't done this, I'll tell you how it works. I'm going to go through a set of questions. It's multiple choice, guys, okay? Just raise your hand. You need to be seated up here. There is prizes for this. We ready? All right, let's get this going then. Okay, first one. Food accounts for 1.2 trillion in global annual losses. With the use of Internet of Things or IoT, this is anticipated to drop by what percentage by 2025? A, 15%, B, 20%, C, 30%, or C, 25%, D, 30%. All right, this is the first hand I saw here. 30, incorrect, unfortunately. All right. C, incorrect. All right, Ohad, I see you. B, 20%. All right, Ohad, right here, gets the first one. All right, next one. What percentage of supply chain professionals currently use predictive data-driven tools? A, 30, B, 36%, C, 40%, D, 42%. All right, it's the first hand I saw.
B, 36.
Close. All right. A little close. Right here. What is it? D is incorrect. A it is. Good job. Okay. Customer satisfaction increased by what percentage due to increasing real-time supply chain visibility? A, 40%, B, 52%, C, 65%, D, 71%. Right there in the back. What was it? 65% is correct. Nice. All right, let's keep this going. Okay, using alternative delivery methods like drones rather than traditional truck delivery increased delivery speeds by how much? A, 3x, B, 10, C, 16x, D, 20x. Right here. Wow, all right, we're starting to warm up here. D is correct. All right, digital twins have helped companies increase their speed to delivery and thus increase value by what percentage? A, 22, B, 27, C, 35, D, 41. I saw a hand here. 41. Close. C it is, 35%. Right up here, Shannon. I know. All right, last one. The vision of Industry 4.0 is to decrease the cost of industrial production, B, more efficient use of natural resources and energy, C, enabling a custom mass production without significantly increasing overall production, or D, all of the above. See you right here. D is correct. All right, right over here. All right, thank you everyone for participating. Shayla, thank you. Okay, I do want to thank our partners. If you haven't had a chance, we've got some great tech that's going in this space. So if you haven't had a chance, please check out Transparent Path. We've got Nokia and we have AWS. And then last but not least, again, the reason for this space, we've got great infrastructure. We've got you guys here. You guys all have some great ideas. Let's have that conversation and see if we can bring some of this stuff to life. So with that, we're going to kick this off with a quick sizzle.
Hello. Good afternoon. Good evening. How is everybody today? Good. It feels like fall. Well, welcome to our 5G Hub September speaker series on supply chain and logistics. So what do we mean by supply chain and logistics? Well, supply chain is the management controls that develop raw materials into finished goods that move from supplier to producer to warehouse to retailers and finally to consumers. And logistics is how efficient and cost-effective we do that. These goods include things we consume and use every day, from the clothes we wear to the food from our local grocer to the cars we drive, and yes, even the shiny new iPhone 15 we all plan to order. The global supply chain management market is over $25 billion and is expected to reach $72.1 billion by 2032. In 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck and caused fulfillment disruptions, it both exacerbated existing issues that supply chains face and surfaced new ones. Over 72% of companies reported a significant negative disruption to their company because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, as companies work to recover from this disruption, they are also battling the effects of a variety of macro trends, including inflation, geopolitical tensions, security concerns, each of which makes the fulfillment process more challenging. To deal with these challenges, it's imperative for businesses to make investments to their supply chain in three important areas. First, visibility. The focus on increasing access to data and improving data collection to support both predictive and preventative features. Second, efficiency. The focus on increasing fulfillment with both speed and lowering costs. And third, resiliency. The focus on increasing a company's ability to respond to disruption, like what we saw with COVID-19. Mobile connectivity is crucial for supply chain and logistics because together with digitization, it enhances competitive advantage by providing real-time visibility, furthering the ability to quickly respond to change, all resulting in enhanced efficiency and resiliency across the value chain. And it's the high bandwidth and increased capacity and low latency of 5G networks that are foundational to enabling solutions with AI, ML, digital twins, IoT, robotics, remote operations, and more that will be instrumental to improving and advancing the supply chain and logistics process. Today, we are going to discuss the current state and challenges for supply chain and logistics, and most importantly, the opportunities with mobile connectivity and the larger technology ecosystem. So please join me in welcoming our panelists out on stage. Hello. Welcome. Have a seat. Thank you for joining. All right, again, you guys are in for another fabulous treat. We have some fantastic panelists, and I'm going to start off with some introductions. All right, so first, here we have Vish Nandlal, who is the VP of Global Technology Strategy at Dell Technologies, where he leads the company's efforts to develop and execute a coherent and comprehensive vision for the future of IT. Vish is also responsible for leading the advanced wireless technology team at Dell, developing the company's technology roadmap in advanced 5G and 6G, and was the co-founder of Dell's telecom business unit. With over 30 years of experience in the industry, Vish has a proven track record of driving growth and innovation across network design, telecommunications, mobile devices, cloud, and 5G. Welcome, Vish. Thank you. All right. And next we have Brian Reed, the worldwide AWS supply chain leader and pan-Amazon supply chain leader at AWS. With 20-plus years of experience in supply chain and having worked across all industries in over 54 countries around the world, Brian has exceptional knowledge and a plethora of skills to successfully work with the largest and most strategic customers on all topics within the supply chain at AWS. Brian's career has centered around transformation innovation while delivering tangible results in complex supply chains in large organizations. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
Thanks.
All right, and then finally we have Eric Weaver, CEO of Transparent Path, a Seattle-based logistics tech startup focused on real-time visibility. Transparent Path platform uses continuously connected IoT sensors, edge computing, and artificial intelligence to track shipments of food, pharmaceuticals, biomedicals, and chemical products. With years of expertise managing teams at more than 100 major brands on e-commerce, blockchain, AI, and augmented reality, Eric has earned over 15 awards for marketing excellence. In his spare time, he lectures for universities worldwide, as well as speaks on topics like transparency, sustainability, and ethics. Thanks for joining, Eric. All right, I think you guys know the drill. I'm going to start off and ask our panelists here some questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience here in the room. And those also joining online, please put your questions into the chat. All right, so to kick this off, when considering connectivity in the supply chain process, what do you view as the greatest opportunity for advancements when considering efficiency, resiliency, and visibility? Vish, let's start with you.
Absolutely. Well, when we look at this in the context of supply chain consists of many disparate activities. Activities that happen in a factory, transportation, warehousing, ports, all sorts of different modes of transport. The thing that needs to bind all those activities together is some kind of fabric, some connectivity of some kind. And as we've seen the industry develop, particularly in 5G, we've kind of seen two variants. One that exists in the outdoor network, the public network, that's driving a lot of the connectivity needs for transportation, and the networks that are built inside of the factories, the ones that are actually automating production. And that's really where a lot of the new activity is. It's how do we enable them for the solutions that come at a cost point that's proportional to the value being created. And the industry is still, teetering a little bit on the, is it delivering the value that it needs, particularly when enterprises have to justify it on their own. And so, as we look to how we resolve those types of issues, we've invented this cute little trick in 5G. It's called network slicing. It's effectively building multi-tenancy inside of our networks. And it gives the opportunity for operators to provide leverage for all these enterprises to take that common capital investment and reduce their cost of ownership to deliver services in building off of a common network. So I think that's where we're starting to see a lot of kind of new discussions around how that's going to be hosted, what are the applications that are going to be driven by it.
What are you seeing as some of these, initial services or applications that are resonating, first?
Yeah. Well, if you're inside of a factory, there's issues that you have with reducing the types of operational halts that exist because of network connectivity issues. we need to kind of move beyond the autonomous operation of industrial robots that exists inside of some of these settings and connect them to some intelligence layers. And that's really where we're going to find the version 2.0 of industrial IoT and digital twins. It's by taking the existing install base of cobots and robots and connecting them to intelligence. And I think that's the transformation that's underway right now.
Excellent. And I think that's a perfect transition into cloud and compute, right, Brian?
Yeah, I think for us, the connectivity is one of those table stakes in many cases. But I think the other thing to remember too, and this is something we have learned at Amazon, is automation and robotics doesn't need to be applied to everything, right? So it's knowing when and where to apply that. Taking the ideas that we've done at Amazon and taking those out to our customers through AWS, I think is something we've also worked a lot on. So, whether it's what we do at Amazon where we track the truck and you can see it coming to your house and see that it's 3 or 4 stops away. The same things we do inside our own facilities, where we talked about robotics and things that happen within a facility like a manufacturing location. Some of those need to be very connected. But there's other things where, it's kind of the old way of doing it is still just as good. Labor in some places is much cheaper than technology too. So I think it's a balance between what you need and what you can do and how you connect that together. And for us in the cloud, doing that from a central location for most tasks, but then also even what we do in our own facilities, we have the edge devices, which I believe we even have some here in the room from AWS, which allow you to do those more, low latency, high computational things on the edge, and then updating those to the cloud again for those features and those capabilities that you need to do in that fashion.
Excellent. Can you maybe share some of the, solutions you've implemented in your warehouses that you've had some of the greatest results and greatest successes with?
Yeah, I'd say some of them, again, go back to the technology. The robotics, I think, is one of the biggest ones. Each of our facilities, depending on the side, will have a few thousand robots inside of them, moving our towers of products around, bringing those to the pick stations and the stow stations to be used. At the same time, it's some non-technology things that have really helped enable that or even driven that, like we do what we call randomized storage. And so randomized storage was an idea, it's not a technology, but then we needed this technology and this connectivity to be able to support that. So I think it's really that intertwining of the idea, the process, and the technology, bringing that together. There's other technologies that we have in the facilities that help with just the people and getting it. And sometimes it's simple things. We have a board in the front of the facility that has attendance and says where everybody's working in that day so that you can go have lunch or have a break with somebody. It sounds very simple. It doesn't sound like it does much, but that enables that connectivity with the people from that perspective without having to wear trackers, which we might have eventually someday. But right now it's all independent to be able to support that interconnectivity of the humans that can then support the technology itself.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Eric, how about you?
Well, when I think about connectivity and I think about the use cases that we deal with, food, agriculture, seafood, they're not the most forward-thinking or forward-tech kind of applications. And it's because the price, the margin has been driven down so far by so much price pressure. So they've never really had to update the data systems that support logistics for those categories. Now, what connectivity does, especially in the remote areas, it gives us the ability to collect that data and automate the collection of that data, which suddenly makes it usable and actionable and lets us do some really fun stuff with it. Now, there's a big learning curve that now that we have this connectivity out in the more distant areas, what does that mean for my business, and which technology should I adopt? And so there's a lot of little bit of resistance for some of these new technologies, but it's up to us to sort of open the doors and explain the benefits.
Excellent. So we were talking earlier that actually probably the biggest challenge is education versus the technology itself.
Yeah, in supply chain we see a lot of folks who are getting closer into retirement like me, who are, they're risk averse. They've worked really hard their entire careers, and one terrible implementation could mean a loss of job security. So there's a real hesitance, especially in the U.S., when we're dealing with older supply chain folks to adopt new technologies. And there have been guys like me who came down the road and installed something not so great. So there's some work to do there.
I think also in supply chain, it's been historically a get it done part of the business. And so you just had to do whatever you needed to do, technology or not. So it also makes these challenges, right, of going to those parts of the business that are stretched out, that are in a warehouse, maybe a little bit dark and dirty, getting them to understand that technology can really accelerate them is a mental change. So like you said, it's not just the technology itself, it's the people and how you engage in them.
Absolutely. And what about the fear of job security? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think fear of job security happens a lot, and we hear that in the news and many different companies. I think we can show plenty of data that says that jobs are not eliminated; they're just changed, right? So instead of somebody doing a manual pick of a product and a robot doing that, someone's got to fix the robot. Somebody's got to program the robot. At the same time, they're different skills. So I think there is maybe some right to have some fear at some level to understand a specific individual's fear of their location or their role and what they do. But it's also that opportunity to upskill and up-level that person and give them opportunity to do something that they may never thought they could do and really be involved in that technology and that connectivity.
Yeah.
I think that there's two sides to that as well. If I look in manufacturing, for instance, as part of the supply chain, the U.S. Department of Labor and Statistics is forecasting that there's going to be a deficit of manufacturing labor available by the year 2030, by almost 1 million. But the other thing to understand is that all this automation that we're bringing in to our supply chains isn't happening overnight. There's going to be a transition period. And what we're seeing is where you're getting productivity in certain segments, other segments are still powered by human capital. And it's one of the reasons why you're not seeing ultimately a full lift of productivity across the end-to-end supply chain, because you're ultimately limited by the segment that is the most vulnerable to automation. If the one that can't be automated is now requiring higher cost labor in order to get it achieved, your overall net productivity just might not increase by 100x, it might only increase by 2x. So those are the areas where you typically see a lot of the gains get soaked up, and you get higher cost labor, and people tend to drift towards those segments, whether it's being able to do assembly in a factory line, which requires an immense amount of dexterity, versus, for instance, operating the laser guided system that's providing the cutouts. So I think that there's a progression that needs to be understood, where jobs will migrate. There'll be higher cost jobs. And you're also going to get, an ability to address some of the labor shortages that are being factored in terms of the forecast planning.
Sure.
One thing I wanted to add to Vish's comments was, especially in food and pharma, changing workflow, especially when there's regulation around that workflow, and people have been doing it for years, it's really hard. And a lot of times, of course, the tools are going to change the workflow. So that's another bit of that sort of risk aversion that we're seeing.
And time, lots of time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Speaking of labor shortages, and now with the pandemic behind us, what would you say was probably the biggest learning with COVID-19?
I think it's the ability to shorten your supply chains. So a lot of them have become overextended. The complexity of how those supply chains all interact, and so understanding how do I get visibility to really give data to make decisions. For instance, if you look at the automobile industry, they have different tiers of vendors, and most OEMs deal with tier 1, not necessarily tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4. Sometimes because of trade secrets, where their sub-suppliers aren't necessarily going to be made visible so that they can be disintermediated. So all those concerns, suddenly started to surface. And in fact, you saw the fact that, the semiconductor shortages hit a lot of the automobile manufacturing. It's because it wasn't necessarily visible all the way through. Yeah. So some of the changes you're seeing are people vertically integrating their supply chains. Companies like Tesla making their own semiconductor for their automobiles, or companies like Starbucks, which have completely integrated supply chains where they can control and get visibility. But others are going to need to find different mechanisms to stitch together what their overall view of all these disparate pieces are. And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see consolidated effort to increase observability, even if it's a part that had been opaque, in prior years.
Yeah, I think I would paint it very similar to what Vish said, which is ownership, control, and transparency are three things that are really people have focused on. Some have gone all the way to say, hey, we want to own this. We want to, own the trucks, the planes, whatever that might be, the drones, the different pieces that can come together and really solve that. But others have just said, well, I want to go the transparency route, like you were saying with the nth tier, as we call it at AWS, and understanding what that information is, whether it's sustainability information, product availability information, demand and supply. I think each group has kind of thought about it slightly differently, but different than the way we did prior to COVID and some of those things. And it's interesting. I think COVID was just a trigger. It accelerated those decisions and accelerated that realization. Those problems are always there. I say now it's nice my wife knows what I actually do because the word supply chain is on the news, not necessarily in a good way because of COVID. So these problems happen, these things happen. We probably would have ended up in the same place we are today, but it might have taken another 5 or 10 years to get there.
I think I would add that U.S. supply chains in particular are very complex, but also extremely efficient and amazingly talented at getting stuff to someplace very quickly. COVID changed all that because suddenly drivers couldn't park or shower, truck drivers. They were stuck and they were getting sick. No one wanted you to bring a virus into their dock. The Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez Canal, the I-40 bridge collapsing, or getting cracks in it or whatever. Each one of those incidents created all these downstream effects, and then there's container shortages, and they'll pile up in China, and then they're back here again. So the machine really sputtered, and it's so much better now than even from last year. But that's one thing I think that was a big learning for everyone.
All right, so we talked about some of the opportunities and challenges. So I want to kind of lead into some of the new technologies, first with the metaverse and digital twins. So a recent study found that 58% of supply chain leaders have deployed metaverse and digital twin use cases. What have you seen or experienced so far with the implementation of metaverse and digital twins within your business, and what is the potential?
Well, I think it's a lot of potential. The metaverse one, I think, is still a little bit out for measurement and understanding what it can really be in the future. I think the cost on the technology has to come down, right, to really make it something that you can broadcast throughout the supply chain and make a lot of use out of it. I think on the digital twin side, that's something that we do at Amazon, and we offer solutions for our customers at AWS that can be very powerful. And I almost hate using the word digital twin because in some cases these are executional components, right? So you're drawing a structure of your business and what that supply chain looks like and how you're mapped. For us, when we had the COVID pandemic hit, we didn't have to do a lot of work to adjust the system. All we had to do is say, I can't ship through this border. So we put a constraint in the system, and the system was built through microservices and other technologies to kind of just rework it all on its own. So yes, it was a digital twin, but we didn't necessarily use it for like the simulation perspective. We actually used it for it to think on its own and to make actions on its own. So I think the digital twin can go both ways. It can be both a, hey, what happens if another Suez Canal blockage happens, or what happens if a pipeline hack happens again. But you can also turn them into execution support systems too.
Yeah, I'd echo some similar comments. Digital twins, there's different stages of digital twin. There's just strict observability on modeling something that exists in the physical world in the virtual world, and those tend to be fairly straightforward. They give a tremendous amount of visibility into the system. Those are the ones that you're probably going to see most likely to be implemented. Then there's the more complex ones, where they're actually trying to react to externalities. And I think this is where the industry wants to go. We're not there as yet. What we're trying to do is to effectively create a Waze for digital supply chains. It's how do I navigate around these obstacles? How do I become predictive and cognitive about where I reroute certain things? I may have a bunch of loads that I don't want to go through contract. I want to take it through spot loads, and I need an open market to be able to bid against those, and carriers to be able to provide services to take them through. Having a digital twin to simulate that can be, very advantageous, and in fact, we're seeing small markets like that emerge. But we're still not quite there. We've got a lot of bottlenecks in the system. Certain areas and segments are gaining advantage. Others are still, waiting for, the automation gods to bless them. So I think it'll take time. This is a slow-moving industry, and secular change happens over more of a time span of decades than it does in years.
Yeah, we've got some ideas on. We feel like we know the steps now at AWS, and we think the technology exists to support the steps. But there's still the hard work to actually build the steps and make them all work together. And then the steps themselves, a digital twin or some other system that is recognizing what's happening in the world, understanding how that could impact your supply chain, giving you an idea to make a change. They still have to integrate with the systems that actually make the change, whether that's an SAP ERP or a transportation management system. And like you said, then that has to integrate with the real world, which are the truck drivers or the airplane buyers, right? The people that actually get the things moved. And I think each one is doing its own part, but one, the whole thing isn't built on technology, and two, each individual group has to be tied together, and that's the hard work that's going to take.
So how can we do that? Because we have the technology, we have the connectivity. How do we make that happen?
I think it's time, it's collaboration. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier today. I mean, you get partners such as the ones we've got here on stage today. Each one has something they do very well, but it's when you connect them together that they can have a powerful impact in something in a space like this. And I think that's required. I don't think anyone, I don't think we as Amazon or AWS can go do it on our own. I think we need support of people, on the network side of the business, the hardware side of the business, the hyperscalers, like all of these components are important. And even bringing in some others, the insurance companies of the world, the Moody's and the data elements of the world that can bring in information to understand when these problems are happening. I think it's got to be collective. Which unfortunately also makes it harder because it's not just building it, but now you're building it and you're trying to collaborate across more parties. They bring something good, but just multiple separate companies just make it more complex and more difficult to.
I'd agree. I don't think this is a technology problem necessarily. Technology availability, just in terms of current state of technology that we have from a factory automation perspective. If you compare the best countries like Germany and Japan, to the rest of the world, there's a 3x difference in terms of density of robots. If you compare just one segment of the industry, like automotive, versus all other segments, it's a 10x difference. Yeah. So there's a possibility for the rest of the world to catch up in terms of productivity by a factor of 3 to 10x already without worrying about digital twins and everything else. I think the issue is really the business process and social changes that are required, and they tend to be very intangible. And they follow more of that J curve of productivity where it dips before it gets better. And for different industries, that happens at different rates of adaptation. And I do think, not to chastise the supply chain industry, but they tend to be an older demographic that's more resistant to change. And I think the processes are so bespoke that it makes it immune to change in some cases.
Yeah. Eric?
I also think we're seeing now, there's been a mindset, at least in food and bev and pharma of logistics, to sort of hoard data, guard data. We don't want proprietary data leaking out. We don't want other people to know our prices, who our partners are, et cetera. And I think that we're at a cusp where people can see the benefits. So for example, when there's a shipment coming in, the driver's going to arrive at the dock at 3 a.m., he's going to sit there burning diesel for 3 hours or 4 hours till the crew gets there, unless they have the real-time visibility, and they can have someone there to meet them. And so both parties benefit, right? You don't have people sitting around, and the driver can go off to his next or her next assignment, and same with the crew at the dock. So I think we're, and part of the reason we named it Transparent Path, I think transparency and collaboration are going to become a bigger and bigger reality in the industry.
Great. All right, so someone did mention robots, so that's going to be my next question here. It says here a 50% increase in efficiency and throughput was seen compared to manual labor when utilizing AI-powered robots to pick, pack, and sort packages. So maybe, Brian, starting with you, can you share how Amazon has integrated robotics into its supply chain and the benefits that you guys have seen?
Yeah, so we've had lots of benefits with robotics. Probably back to my initial comment too, is it depends on the space that you're bringing those into. So some of the things that we've shown publicly, and you can see on YouTube and other places if you want to kind of see how they work. The robots that are really almost cobots, but they're bringing the product to the pick station and the stow station. Those have been very useful for us. I mean, we use a lot of machine learning and vision at those stations to help the humans also, but ultimately we leave the decision and the action up to the humans. We test all sorts of different kinds of robots to see what's good and what's working. And there's still some that haven't measured up from a business case perspective, whether that's the cost or the efficiency or the speed is usually one that's really difficult. So if you look at random pick robots, or if you look at things that are taking off of a truck, some of those are just not up to the speed yet. So I think we've learned, just like we do in everything else we do at Amazon, which is you got to try to be able to succeed and potentially fail, and just keep trying until you get the ones that are really successful for you. And so yeah, I'd say we've had a few that have been very successful, and on average, like I said, we've got a few thousand of those robots in each one of our 400 plus facilities throughout the network. And so I think volume too gives you more learning, especially on the AI side of the business. The more data, the better. So our scale does help with that maybe a little bit more. And of course, at AWS, we try to bring some of that intelligence out to our customers too. I think from a robotic perspective, it's not just the hardware itself, but it's the technology that connects the hardware. Each robotic unit and system will have its own operating system. And if you have two robotic systems working together, they typically don't talk to each other. And so we've done a lot of development internally of how we get these systems to almost have an overarching operating system that connects them all and really handles that interaction between the robots. And I think that's something that's coming more and more as more companies get different kinds of robots. I think that'll be a technology will be very useful from a digital perspective, not just physical.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We tend to think that the robotics are a panacea for everything, but there's a scale of flexibility and precision that needs to be factored. It comes down to that old aphorism about AI. AI can do things that are hard easily, but can't do things that are easy very well, because they tend to be very hard problems. So things like being able to do grip, the force torque services that are out there, the strain wave systems that are out there are starting to become good, but they're not as precise as a human. I think those types of things are going to get addressed over time as technology improves, but they're just not fit for purpose today.
Yeah, for us it's volume, right? I mean, it's those technologies are getting there, but I don't just need to do it once.
Yeah.
I need to do it a million times. And so we're also challenged at Amazon that our scale sometimes inhibits some of the technology that we can use. You always think, Amazon's got the scale, they're going to have the best technology in the world, but sometimes just the volume that we're moving through our facilities, I needed to do 1 million units versus 1,000 units, and that requires a different type of maturity of the technology too.
Sure. Okay. Eric, any thoughts maybe just around AI, not necessarily robotics?
I can't speak to robotics so much, but AI is, of course, the buzzword of the year. The Pope in a puffy jacket. God, who cares? There's so many other important things to solve besides that. For example, predictive and prescriptive analytics. When you have a ton of data, like Amazon does, you can do amazing predictions into the future of around your supply chains. And so we see predictive analytics as a really powerful tool as we gather and connect this data across especially food and pharma to empower and inform business owners on courses of actions to take. So it's an exciting time for that, but the generative, not so much. Predictive, prescriptive, definitely.
Sure. Okay. So I have one more question here for Eric, and then I am going to turn it over to the audience. So if you guys want to get your questions ready. Eric, I know you spoke about this earlier when we were having our lunch, actually, saying that food wastage globally accounts for 1.2 trillion in losses. IoT-enabled farming and food production has the potential to reduce global food wastage by 20%, roughly $240 billion worth. Is there more that we can do?
That's a great question. I want to share a story along these lines,
Please.
just a brief story. My cousin Mike is a truck driver. He's an independent owner-operator. He picked up a load of frozen or king crab meat from a cold storage warehouse, and he brought it to a big retailer, name not mentioned, to their DC, and he dropped it off. And he was about 30 miles away, and he got a call. The crab is rotten. Come back here and dump it. So he turns the car around. Now he's late for his next thing. He picks it up. Sure enough, it's awful. He takes it to the dump, and the company is like, you better call your insurance company because you're on the hook for the whole load, $400,000. So he goes, he pays his $5,000 deductible, he pays the $3,000 dump fee, and he's now late for his next gig. there's now a downstream effect of two people in the back room doing a reconciliation for the insurance company, and there's the water to process the crab. There's the carbon that was used to send the boat out into the Bering Sea to catch the crab, and there were the payroll for the fisher, the guys on the boat. So for that $400,000 load of crabbing is actually $1 million of waste and carbon and all these kind of things. So I'm sharing this long story because a $150 tracker could have saved $1 million. We have the connectivity, we have the data, we can do this now. And this mindset of, oh, well, insurance, that can go away, and that's one thing that the industry can do to stop the environmental impacts, the people impacts, the cost impacts.
And we're seeing that through some of our partners and customers too, in the insurance industry, right, where they're really starting to pivot from a payer to a protector, right? So in the old ways, they said, well, let's just figure out how much it costs for the claim and the people that are running the claim and do all this. And now they're saying, well, why don't we partner with a company like this and charge for that to our customers to help them protect their supply chain so that they don't have to have the claim in the first place. And it's a different way of thinking. So I think some industries are really starting to grab onto that more.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. All right, let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Please just step right up to the mic.
Hi. Very interesting conversation. My name is Ohad Barnoy from Amdocs. My question is not directly about logistics and supply chain, maybe about the underlying technology. I recently relocated from Israel to Seattle in October, and my wife and I brought our dog with us. So she flew with us in the plane. We did manage to put an AirTag on her, but all we actually knew is that she took off from Tel Aviv. The AirTag did tell us that she reached Europe, but we didn't know if she got off the plane, got onto the next plane, was she let out for a walk like the airline told us she would be. And then when we got to Seattle, it took about an hour until the AirTag picked up anything to tell us that she's here with us. What could be done differently? And I get it that maybe there's no ROI on my specific use case, but I'm looking at like maybe a more global. I would pay $100 if somebody told me I could get transparency about that journey. But is the technology there? Is it just implementing it? Does the use case not make sense?
I can take this one. So one thing that cellular gives us is that at least when you're on the ground, you'll have real-time instant connection and know exactly what's happening at any given time with your pet. And we went through the exact same thing with our dog when we moved to London. The poor thing was just shattered when it got let out of its pen. The issue with the AirTags, which are amazing devices, and it's a great system, is that they're NFC and Bluetooth, so you have to be around other Apple phones and connectivity to have that. So I believe that cellular will become cheaper. Now, will it become as ubiquitous as we want it to, like to that level? Who knows, hopefully someday. But I think that would solve some of those problems. It's those windows of a lack of visibility that are painful because you don't know what's happening. Your customer doesn't know what's happening. Your dog doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah, I would add two things to that. One is in that case, and in some other cases like that, some of that data already exists. It's just not being passed on to you. So, for example, they know that the dog was loaded into the plane. They recorded that in their system. They're just not passing that information on to you. So I think that transparency, right, and it's something you can blame Amazon a little bit for that, right? That some of that transparency that we've given to consumers over the years has driven some things in other industries, and our customers now want to do that in the business-to-business side, not just business-to-consumer. I think there's also, we talked earlier about connecting partners. I'll use an ocean example, which is very similar. The stuff goes onto the ocean ship, and again, there's no cellular going across the ocean. But there's actually trackers out there today that track these vessels and know exactly where they are. So as long as one group records that it's on the ship, there's someone else that can tell you exactly where that ship is. Now, today they don't talk to each other. So you as the end consumer, or even you as a business user, don't see that connectivity. But the technology is there. And the data is even there. It's just getting the partners to work together better.
One thing I want to add also is that the T-Mobile Starlink partnership, which I believe is still a thing, will make connectivity on the plane a thing so that trackers on the plane, including a tracker for your dog, would be able to communicate in real time at any given time. So in addition to the location of the vessel, you could get the actual what's happening inside the cargo hold.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name's Dan Meyer with Fresh Consulting here in Bellevue. One of our focuses this year has been on consulting, innovation consulting, technology consulting of ports. So my question for the panel is kind of twofold. One, what opportunities do you see for ports to use some of the latest technologies? And two, what role do you see them playing as opposed to what their business partners play and some of the users of the ports? What role do you see the ports actually taking on in driving the connectivity, in facilitating some of the improvements that we can all see because all the tools are there, as you've been saying? You know, what role do you see the ports actually play in that?
Yeah, I think we're going to echo some similar themes, but one of the I guess the great unfortunate parts of the world is that we didn't standardize on these different systems. Everything's done fairly unique to a particular implementation. So you may have a pallet lifter that has a certain amount of information. You've got the official who's actually doing the unloading. He has another set of process systems that he's using to checkpoint the delivery of a particular shipping container. You've got the transport truck that's taking the shipment and exiting the port. Like, all of those systems are disparate. So there needs to be some way to standardize on the information that's being collected and then fused in a way that can be presented to people so that they can query it efficiently. There is no standard, really. There's something called the SCORE system that was developed, but it's not ubiquitously deployed. Each of these port systems could become API aggregators and be able to take that relevant information and make it presentable. I think that's a pretty keen area. The other thing that I think ports could do a lot more effectively is what we had talked about right from the outset, is that there needs to be a network fabric that stitches all these things together, that's made available to all these different players. And to some extent that can't be provided by just the macro public network. You need a slice of that could be provisioned by the port and or a dedicated network that they put up that has some of the cellular capabilities that we've been talking about. So those are some things that they can take on. I think there are third parties who are coming in and providing those as horizontal layers. It just hasn't been evenly distributed as yet.
I think ports are an interesting part of the supply chain too, right? They're fixed, like they're fixed. They're very expensive. There's only so many of them. They're relatively individually managed and owned, right? And so you'll have competition between them, which goes back to the fact of lack of standardization and not working together. There's some that are better than others, right? Some that really lean on technology, like the Port of Rotterdam, Port of Hamburg, and places like that, where they have autonomous vehicles driving them around. Same thing in China and some of the ports there. So I think some of them are getting that way. I think the big focus is on efficiency of the ports. I live down south of Los Angeles. The ports in LA are not big enough to support the goods that need to come in, not just for LA, but for the rest of the United States. And the only way we're going to be successful is if they, inside their own walls, become more efficient. So I think their biggest focus, in my opinion, should be on their own efficiency. The transparency and the connectivity to the rest of the world to support, what everyone else needs, I think is secondary. It's important, but if they can't support just getting the goods flowing through and doing that more efficiently, doing that with the labor control that they have and the kind of restrictions and the issues that they run into occasionally there, they're going to need that technology to kind of help them get past that efficiency stage.
I'm seeing more and more use cases of machine vision used in ports to read the letters and the numbers on containers and trucks as they go by, as they enter and exit the port. And I think that's a great use case for 5G and for AI.
That's right.
But slow. I mean, I first saw that in the port of Santiago, Chile, about 12 years ago. So it's great technology, but I think you're right. The connectivity is really inhibited for that from becoming more and more precise.
In my opinion, one of the biggest next problems to solve for all the disparate parties to work together is control of the data, ownership and control of the data. All the data is there if we could pull it all together, but people won't because they don't want to give up their data and trust somebody else with it. And so getting over that hurdle is more than just a technology solution, but I'm looking forward to when that happens and we can use all the available data out there to make some awesome systems and move our goods around the world.
Yeah, I think the good news is I feel like there's a shift that's come. So giving some of my age, but in the early 2000s when all these marketplaces were around, right, and that whole idea was out there, the technology wasn't ready. So people had some sense like, hey, I'm going to be in the metals marketplace, or I'm going to be in the rubber marketplace, and we're going to share some of this data, but the technology wasn't there to support it. I think now we've got the technology to support it, and I'm starting to see some things with Cofinity and Catena-X and some of these different not marketplaces, but data sharing initiatives that hopefully what you said is starting to happen a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is John Martin. I wanted to ask a little different question from operational efficiency, maybe a meta version of the dog question, which is about traceability, which I think is on the whole a sort of net virgin new application. People weren't really thinking about it before, but being concerned if there's a bad batch of fish or farmer or a toxic toy or a bad chip or a flawed battery. Can you talk about how much that is trending, or maybe it's not so trending, and how these applications address the traceability demands?
I can speak to that. FDA just released the traceability final rule, which mandates all perishable producers, or most of them, must report detailed traceability by 2026. So there is a huge push right now for companies dealing with food to quickly find and adopt these kind of technologies, because they're going to have to. And 3 years is not a lot of time to implement, especially in larger organizations. So I think traceability is got a huge mandate right now and push from regulations to be implemented.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about it maybe in a slightly different way. Is for us, traceability starts at the inbound, the source, right? So how I make the material, or how I make the component, or how I make the product, then translates into the traceability. So even back what you were saying, like with the nth tier of traceability of the inbound supply to make a subcomponent or the final product, and being able to trace the lot numbers, batch numbers, whatever it might be that go into the product, and then storing that information because it's useful for the source and making the product, then storing that information and using it for right to repair, fraud, whatever it might be. I think it does depend a little bit on what the material or the product is. So like you said, pharma, food, high-cost goods like the phones that are in many of our pockets, or maybe in automotive for some of the right to repair things there too, especially with the electric cars that have come along. We kind of look at it as two parts of the equation, but if you can start with a source, it just carries on to the traceability side. And so yeah, I'd say we're seeing an uptick. I don't know if I'd call it yet a huge push, but definitely seeing an uptick in interest in that for different reasons.
I think that there is an increasing need for us to get traceability in our supply chain, particularly at Dell, critical infrastructure that's being deployed for hosting a service that may have consequential impact if they went down. It's important that we have chips and other items that are populating a board to be authentic. To have their provenance well understood. And those are little techniques that Dell has embedded across their supply chain to ensure that it's secure and resilient. So I don't know if there's a tremendous amount of open standards around it. I think you'll find that a lot of different supply chains are implementing their own overlays on top of it. But I do think it's an area of massive concern.
Thanks. Thank you. All right, we'll go over here next.
All right. Dr. Jamar Montgomery here. Thank you for this esteemed panel. My question is how are you bringing your entire organizations into a model-based engineering kind of environment? And what I mean by that is you spoke earlier about how you've created cognitive models that have allowed you to shift your supply chain as a result of putting those different constraints in. So how are you bringing that to in organizations, not just from a supply chain perspective, but bringing your entire organization in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that. So we have the concept of microservices from a technology perspective at Amazon, but really our entire organization kind of operates on that perspective. In other words, Amazon's a very large company, but at Amazon and AWS, we have very independent groups that almost feel entrepreneurial. They can go out and they can do their own innovations, they can do their own connectivities, and then we have mechanisms that help us connect to those teams. So much like you do in technology where someone publishes an API or a connectivity link that says this is how you talk to me and this is how you work with me, we do the same thing with the people side of the equation and the innovation, so that if I need to go collaborate across to Amazon Business, which is another component within Amazon, I can go to a wiki page and I can see who is over there to talk to, and then we can innovate together. I can even do that on the technology side without even talking to them, because they publish the standards within our four walls to kind of talk how to do that. So yeah, we've probably taken that microservice concept a little bit higher level and really applied that to how we do mechanisms and different things within what we do at Amazon and AWS too.
Yeah, I think, very similar concepts. It's, what are the elements of the supply chain where you can separate concerns? How do you standardize and ensure that, you can take that level of standardization and then automate it? Those are internal standards that we would leverage within Dell, but we're also working with third parties. And third parties provide de facto standardization or industry standardization to some extent based on how heavily adopted they are. Things like just being able to automate payments using third parties. There's this old adage in supply chain industry that goods move in one direction and money moves in the opposite direction, and sometimes your speed is actually impeded not so much by the movement but by the payment. And so being able to audit your bill of ladings appropriately, which can take a long time, and do that, within seconds, and then be able to, do the remittance. Things like that, you leverage third parties to be able to help manage that for you because they have, horizontal scalability across the industry. So it's a combination of things. I think more and more we're seeing that happen, I think, as the industry matures.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the gentleman ahead of me asked me my last question about traceability and inputs into the system, so this gets to be an opportunity to end on a fun one. So I was going to ask you about what you've seen in organizations capturing data, putting data to the system on their inputs upstream. So what are the more creative ways you've seen people doing this?
Yeah, I think that from our perspective, that we see a lot with our customers is the vision and the video and kind of the attainment of information from that perspective. Obviously, we can have long conversations around what Alexa does in our homes to support us. But I think from a supply chain perspective, we use a lot of that internally ourselves. We use a lot of vision-based technology to understand, where we're putting things away, where we're receiving things, so that you're not doing constant scans of barcodes and things like that, again, have to be standardized, and we have to check a lot. So I think vision is one of the things that's probably the most innovative that I've seen, and things that we're really bringing in and using it in some interesting ways. Obviously, all the way up to the drone deliveries that we test, that those use a lot of vision capabilities too.
Yeah, no, I'd probably kind of mention the similar technologies. I think there's a continuum here of what are some of the early things. It's industrial IoT type of technologies. We're definitely seeing digital twins starting to be experimented with. There's some that are, more secular technologies that have growth potential. A lot of that is, 3D vision, which is really starting to take root. 3D vision is very different than, consumer vision products that you can buy because they tend to be highly customized to the environment in which they're being deployed. That's really taking flight. There's big companies like Keyence and others who are making pretty massive strides there. And then there's, the technologies that, are very mature. And it's actually, looking at what are the types of practices that are kind of being evolved within the mature technologies that are interesting. If you look at companies like Rockwell with their manufacturing execution system and the things that they're able to do, given that they've standardized in many ways how the machines talk to one another, they're doing some very interesting creative things with their customers. I think it's a mixed bag. You can look across that technology maturity curve and see different instances of innovation happening. It's an exciting time.
That's a good point.
There's a number of standards that are also taking over the world. Some have been around for a while, like GS1. So with food and pharma, we're standardizing the data that we're exchanging between organizations. That's helping a lot. We do middle mile traceability, and first mile is very, very difficult because it's so complex. So having GS1, or if you're in seafood, the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, these organizations are starting to come together and are getting folks on board to adopt them. So that will help a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to pause just for a second. We do have a question that's online. Jimmy?
Yeah, this comes from Mo Payne. So whether it be because of increased tariffs, regulatory changes, or concerns about supply chain difficulties experienced during the pandemic, how do you see the shift with the geopolitical non-China manufacturing and country of origin influence the what to automate and innovate logistics overall supply chain?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think understanding where things are coming from and where they're being produced and where they're going is very important in the equation of connectivity and automation. I was just meeting a few weeks ago with one of the largest retailers in Thailand, and they were asking these questions very similar, like what should we automate? You know, where should we put our focus in our supply chains? And the answers for someone like that is completely different than most companies would be in the United States. The cost of labor is that much less in Thailand, and so I think you really have to think about all of those factors: the cost of labor, the geopolitical impacts of things happening in China or Vietnam or Thailand or anywhere else, and how those can impact what your supply chain is. I think we've seen a lot of changes definitely in the U.S. Because of what we've gone through in COVID, and you've seen shifting of the supply chain from China to places like Vietnam. You've seen obviously things coming onshore, whether that's in Mexico or Canada or even directly into the United States. But unfortunately, I don't think it's like a one-size-fits-all answer. I think you really have to look at all those different factors and make some changes, and then use the technology that makes the most sense to adjust to that network change.
For food and pharma, I'm seeing more and more examples of concerns and regulations around slave fishing, around child mining, and deforestation in Brazil. And so there's increasing regulations around having the data for those things so that you can prove that you ethically sourced your product, even if you're the end buyer or you're the producer who's sourcing this fish or this cobalt or whatever. So I think that also is coming together now. And becoming much more of a mandate for companies.
Yeah, ESG as a requirement, not as an option anymore. Yeah.
I think one of the things that you could extract from particularly the geopolitical issues is how much more dynamic our supply chains need to be. They tend to be fairly brittle and static, and so external events can have quite damaging effects. So something as simple as how do I shift where ports might have been congested in China to ports that are now congested in Africa, how do I optimize for the routing? Today, people are sitting with Excel spreadsheets, managing that in some cases. Some more advanced institutions are doing that using, kind of predictive flows. But by and large, it's not something that the community has equal access to. And particularly when things occur at a macro scale, and you have ships kind of lining up at ports, which is creating massive delays just because they don't have enough pallets to unload things. That's where optimization can really, benefit, I think, the overall, supply chain community. And today we don't have that. It's far too static. There is, not enough dynamism. You can't, for instance, suddenly divert and look at how many carriers are putting spot load opportunities on the market and taking advantage of those in a very flexible way as you shift certain quantities from one site to the next. Where you get your supply from in terms of the diversity of your suppliers. And, even something as simple as software. There's a whole software bill of materials part that comes into the supply chain that's also needing to be accommodated, and tracing the origin and provenance of that is another complexity that needs to be layered on top that we've already seen be disrupted by things like the geopolitical fissures that we're seeing. So there's a lot that can be done if we kind of solve this problem end to end. Right now it's not end to end, it's in piece and parts. And because it's in piece and parts, there's this old engineering principle, if you can't automate something if not everything's automated. Your speed of acceleration is limited by the weakest link. And today we have got a lot of weak links. And so we've got some yardage to go before all of this starts to become as flexible and dynamic, I think, as we'd like. Which is fun, because we'll all have jobs for a while.
There you go. Great, thank you. Thank you for the question. All right, we'll go back to the room here.
Hi. I wanted to go back to kind of the people part of the equation. You mentioned earlier the shortage of manufacturing labor of about 1 million people by 2030. And I think you mentioned about how the skill set needed for the future technology is very different than what we have in the labor force today. So what are your companies doing to kind of upskill, or how do you look at that problem as far as education? And is there anything you think needs to be kind of changed or done differently industry-wide when it comes to education of the workforce?
Yeah, that education is a big thing. But business process reengineering is another big one. I think that the adoption of technologies is always going to hit the human wall. There's a certain cognitive load that you can take on, and that takes time before you develop precision and standardization where people can actually inhabit these roles. And that's usually, like, you can step out and look at it from a macro sense. Why have we only hit 3% GDP per capita for so long? It's because there's all these intangibles that are happening in the economy that's unseen. They're investments that companies are making, and those resources that are being invested can't be invested in increasing productivity of whatever goods that you're trying to produce. And so until those take root, you're not going to reap the benefits or the dividends of them. And so we're in that period of understanding those intangibles. And a lot of it has to do with how are we reorganizing. You can imagine, a company that decides to become more data-driven has to invest in a bunch of software developers. It takes time for them to do that, to extract their data, to set up the systems in the data lakes and model it and have common schemas and understand provenance. And there's all that work that needs to be done that goes out in this opaque bubble of intangibility. That's what we're going through right now. And so I'm going to take the courageous assumption and say that all of these guys are doing the same things. We're retraining our workforce. Certainly, Dell is making a lot of investments in that. I know Amazon is. But, it takes a while for that to occur. And, until that happens, we're not going to really ignite all these productivity benefits.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're putting a lot of Band-Aids in, right? Yeah. And they're late stage Band-Aids, right? So the arm is already falling off and we're trying to put a little sticky Band-Aid on it. When in reality, I look at what my kids are learning in school. They're not learning the things that we're already trying to do in technology, let alone the things we're going to do in technology in 10 years when they get there. And so I think that's a big miss. And I don't just put it on the school education systems. I think it's also on the businesses and how we support the schools and how we get, kind of back into them what we're going to need in 10 or 15 years, so that as the kids are coming up through high school, college, whatever it might be, that they're getting trained on those things so that it doesn't end up, in our laps, partially to our own fault, and then us just putting in a Band-Aid of cross-training and upskilling and things that we're doing our best, but it's almost too late in the equation to have the kind of impact that we really could have if we started earlier.
I would just add, I saw a statistic from 2022, I think it was Deloitte, said that there are 6 job openings in supply chain for professionals for every one person who's qualified, which is amazing. And then you end up with planners, coordinators who are so exhausted and so overworked, so sick of sitting in front of a Zoom camera or being on the phone that they quit. And then you're really in a bad place. So I think the need for making those jobs more tenable in terms of, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say pay and benefits and things like that, will keep those precious resources. Because it takes a certain person to do that kind of work, a very organized, aggressive, go-get-them kind of person, and they're not easy to find.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. All right, you've been patient. You get the last question.
All right, I'm going to use the mic because I'm tall. I'm going to grab it. So I know Eric mentioned that kind of the old generation is what's running logistics and supply place and supply chain, and I've seen it throughout my career that you always have the old generation kind of being very conservative, and we know they're going to retire. 10 to 15 years, the new generation is going to come on board. By that point, the new generation is going to be the old generation, and we know the technology is out there. we know that it works, we know that we can implement it, but it's always the human factor and the old generation. So how do we shorten that time frame? Because if my generation's going to take over and bring in all these new ideas, they're going to be old by the time we get there and we have the power to actually implement them.
That's a great question. I think part of it is how you operate as an organization, and right, and how you value the different stages of life, right, that you have within the organization, whether that's the older generation or the new generation coming in. I do think that you do have to, as you were saying earlier, right, make the technology easier to consume, and also understanding how it does impact. I mean, if they've only got a year or two left, well, let's make it the best year or two, or the easiest year or two maybe for them if they're on their way out, to be able to make them understand how that's valuable, not just for them, but for the organization. I think that's important to have that culture within your organization. I think Amazon and AWS, we do a lot of that. We don't have anything that's really associated with new and old generation. We've got people that are senior that are young, and we've got people that are junior that are old, and it seems to work out pretty well. I think that you just have to have that kind of cross-pollination. And I think it's also just on an individual level, right? It can't be the old generation versus the new generation. You somehow have to not just bring them together with the technology, but bring them together as human beings with your diversity and inclusion and some of these other things too.
Great points.
Yeah. I think there's, the thing to extract from that is, there's always been this co-evolution of technology and practice. And you can't really train people until you have good best practices to train them on, because as things are being developed, they change so rapidly. And so it's how do we shorten those cycles? How do we get the best practices more quickly? And there are new tools that we're getting out. If you're able to simulate things and test out corner cases, instead of doing it one by one, you can do it a million-fold over, and you can rapidly get to some best practices. We're seeing technologies that are emerging that are allowing that very thing. The other thing is how quickly can you train people? There's some really good opportunities that we're seeing the green shoots of through virtual reality. I know that sounds like a horrible buzzword, but having said that, the studies are showing that versus classroom settings, people who are trained using more immersive types of technologies tend to learn a lot more quickly. They tend to retain a lot more quickly and be able to implement things and understand exceptions a lot more quickly. And so what is a lot more quickly? It seems to come out in and around the 30 to 35% range. So all of those things are helping to contribute, but I do think that there are some, just pragmatic, old-fashioned things that we should be doing. And one of them is being able to have, a quicker exchange of data through mentorship. And, you can trace the roots of this all the way down to, concepts like pair programming. You can get, a master and apprentice to work together side by side, and they become more senior, more adept developers much more quickly by having mentors. And that mentor system is kind of broken down a little bit in the industry. Certainly I notice in engineering circles that it's not as prolific as it once was. So that's more of anecdotal, but I do think that there's a role for that, and I don't know if that we're bridging it quickly enough.
Yeah, that's one area I'm hoping we get better at, which is that transfer of knowledge, right? Like, how do we get that intelligence from the older generation and get that over to the younger generation in a more efficient way? Again, how do we get it out of them in a way that they feel okay with, but also get it to the younger generation and immersive technology, right, that they like?
I'll close with a happy story. I've pitched a number of freight forwarders, and they're like, hey, thanks for playing, we got this, I'm close to retirement, see you later. And we just landed a client for another freight forwarder, 106-year-old company, but it's run by young guys now. All the other guys moved on, and they're like, where have you been all my life? So I think that when there's the lack of risk aversion, when there's an easier embrace of technology, as more of those folks, risk-averse folks retire, and the hungry guys come forward, and gals, they're going to embrace the technology as a competitive advantage. And the ones who are doing it now are going to compete a little better than the others. So.
Great. Thank you. I love how, we ended on talking about the people. Despite this technology and automation, at the end of the day, it always comes back to the people and the investment that we make in the people. So I love that. So let's give our panelists a round of applause. Also, our audience, you guys had some great questions this evening. Thank you very much. And of course, I'm going to give a plug for our next speaker series session on October 10th. The topic is cybersecurity. So please go to it's Cybersecurity Month in October. So please go to our website and register. And for those here, please stick around. We have networking happy hour, and we still have some fantastic demos there along the back wall. So thank you again, everybody. Have a good evening.